bit longer to let people wander their way in.
Perfect. Thanks for being here, John.
Glad to be here. I helped out with this last year and was glad to be invited back for this year. Got a couple of more minutes and then we will get going. So how's the event been so far today? I just dropped in since we were out doing wedding planning stuff.
Oh, wow. That's been pretty neat. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I saw that Jared was out in the lobby. He was doing a presentation earlier, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I think that's when I was with, um, hmm, I was with David. Yeah.
Oh, David Rodeback?
Yes.
Okay.
David. He had some very interesting
Yeah, he came out to
critique
Harriman and
pieces.
did a presentation for us.
I enjoyed how to be a good critique partner.
Oh, okay.
Jenny, have you enjoyed yourself so far?
Oh yes, the last class I was in was so much fun. We were
Yeah.
laughing the entire time. That was good. Oh, Melissa was there with me. Yeah, it's been good. I
All
enjoyed
right.
it.
Well, we are at 2:30, so let's get started. Um, just structurally, this is a small enough group that if you want to interrupt and say anything, just go right ahead. Uh, I like to have that kind of back and forth feel to it so that I can make sure I'm meeting your expectations for why you were here and what you want to learn. And so, uh, I put this together because uh, well, it was a request for a conference I was going to. I think it was the Quills conference, where they wanted something on the idea of structure and outlines. And so I came up with this one where, some people are outliners, other people's are not. People are not. Some understand story structure, others really don't study it. So how do you make the most of outlines and story structure that's tailored to your writing style? And so we're going to talk about outlines in relation to story structures and what you can do to match all of that to how you like to write and what works well for you. Uh, the problem is that anyone who tells you there's only one way of doing a particular thing with writing is almost certainly wrong. And so the things that I'm going to talk about, I try to leave enough flexibility in there to where it allows for multiple approaches because everybody writes differently. We aren't all the same in how we approach problems. And so I like to uh, have a kind of a broad approach that's going to fit a lot of different people. And yeah, I like doing these presentations because I love sharing the things that I have learned and the things that I've discovered with other writers. And so I hope you learn something useful as well here. So, first thing is, well, what is an outline? How many of you have written an outline before? Or do you tend to write more by the seat of your pants? What's the kind of the breakup of who does what?
I done outlines for school, but not for writing. I just write.
Oh, okay. So you're kind of halfway between camps. So one of the things about outlines is some outlines are a single page, some are a quarter the size of the novel it describes, some match up perfectly to the final product. Some outlines get tossed as irrelevant almost immediately. And so the goal here is to use some of the story structure ideas to put together an outline that does what you want it to do and works with the way you want to write. Now, whether that's actual written down on paper or not, yeah, that's going to be one of the things that you have to explore and decide what really does work well. The idea there is that you want to write what you need, but even if you're not a pure seat of the pants author, I think you should probably, yeah, even if you are seat of the pants, I think you should spend some time thinking about what you want to go into a story to decide on the basics. You probably don't just sit down with a blank page and start brain dumping. You think about, okay, what kind of a story is this going to be? What genre is it going to be? Do I have maybe one or two plot points in mind for what I want to do? And so I'm going to cover a few of those ideas as we go through this presentation. So the next question, what is story structure? Yeah, you can ask 5 authors about that and get 10 answers. I've got a few listed there on the screen. You've got Snowflake, you've got Save the Cat, you've got 3 act, 4 act hero's journey, 7 point, Lester Dent. There are a lot of different story structures. And so structure is not really the same as the outline. It's a lot more fundamental. It's kind of the underpinnings that go beneath the outline that you're putting together. And so story structure has been talked about and written about a lot. So everyone has their ideas on how this works and how to approach it, and they're all different. Do any of you have a particular story structure, one of the ones I've listed, or something else that you like to use, or have you used that you've used in the past?
I just write as I go.
Me too. You know, I'm writing a memoir, so I think that's kind of cheating because I already know the story, like so and
Right.
I've been thinking about how I'm gonna write it for my entire life. So I kind of already had a structure in my head. But I think that if I was to write fiction or something else, I do want to have something in writing so I can not get lost.
Right. So yeah, that's exactly what I want to go through as I'm going through this presentation is some of those things like I don't want anybody to feel lost as they're going through that process. Uh, some people will think that they have writer's block when what they have is I'm not sure what part of the story comes next. And so, yeah, if we can at least have some of those basics and let you know, okay, this is the basic flow of a story. If you've read a lot or if you've written a lot, those things tend to get built into your brain. And so you're familiar with the way other authors have approached story, or you're familiar with how you have approached it in the past. And so it makes a big difference to have that background even if you don't have the formal structural elements down yet. So nearly all of these structures have the same basic principles and they generally map onto each other really well. Now, so if you don't believe me that all of those have a lot of similarities, I put a little spreadsheet thing together. Some of this was copied from another site that I can give you the link to, but I added in some additional information. Uh, this is, of course, too small to actually read. What it does is it lists the story structures along the left-hand side here, and it lists the Act 1, Act 2, divided into Act 2A and 2B, and then Act 3 across the top. And then for each of the different story structures that it's comparing, it puts the elements of that structure in the right place on the graph. And so you can see how everything's a parallel of each other. And quite often it's just called something different under a different structure. And so basic story structure has a common flow through all of them. Now, there may be some specific beats that you use in a different, one specific kind of a story. But what I want you to learn from this is that you can pick a particular structure if you want to, and if it works for you, you can use it. If it doesn't, there are a lot of others that you could look into. Now, I've used Lester Dent's ideas of having an inciting incident, piling on trouble, adding twists, piling on more trouble, and then resolving it. I've also used Dan Wells' 7-point structure, and not only for the overall story, but at the chapter and the scene level as well. And I've used Save the Cat. Use the ideas that resonate with you. If something looks like it makes sense to you, that's a really good clue that, okay, maybe that is a structure that will be useful to me. So if you're not an outliner, what do you think you could gain from having a list of all of these elements to look through? What can it give you? Ideas?
I think it
Perhaps.
can help you discover pieces of the story that maybe you haven't thought about.
Yeah, there are actually two different approaches to this that I have seen. One is you have the list of story elements and then you decide, okay, I'm going to build a story and map those into it. Another way of learning about these structures is to pick a story structure and take a well-known story that you're really familiar with and map that existing story onto the structure to see how some other author has used it.
Mm.
And so, yeah, you can stuff all of your ideas into your brain and see what pops out as you write by saying, okay, if I look at one particular piece of this story structure, am I doing that somewhere in my story? If not, well, what could I do that would fit into it? And so it's a really good way of spurring your thoughts on what you can add into your story. So then you can just jot down brief ideas, or you can put together an extensive outline, whatever is going to work for you. So that all can be really simple or very complex. The idea is that you want those notes to not tie you down. If you find out, okay, I put all these notes together, but then I ignored all of them, well, maybe you wrote a little bit too much, went into it a little bit too far. You need to back out a little bit. Or if you keep thinking, well, that worked really well, maybe you can lean into that some more.
I like
So,
that. So don't let it cripple you by being too structured with the
right.
outline. Okay.
Now, I'm a software engineer by trade. I live and die by structure. And so I am a major outliner. And so other people are not. And so you have all these different approaches to it. And so what works for me may not work for you. We're kind of on opposite ends of that spectrum between plotting and pantsing. But I'm hoping that the things we're talking about here work across that entire range. So, a basic outline. You know, you're probably all familiar with this, where you need, when you're putting together a story, a setting, a character, a problem, a solution to the problem. That's very basic, super high level. What is a story? And so by the end, your character has either found a solution to their problem or they have failed to find that solution and you end the story differently. That tends to be more like a tragedy kind of a story. And there's a lot that happens in the middle as your characters work toward the solution to their problem. Now, all of you could probably keep this short list in your head really easily, saying, okay, do I have a setting? Oh, check. Yeah, got that. Got a character? Yep, I have a character I'm writing about. Does the character have a problem? Yep, I've got a problem in there. Okay, how do I plan on solving this problem? Am I going to end up with a romance happily ever after, or am I going to end up with some other kind of a story? And so you have at least this high level, I think, is pretty common to have that entire thing just in your head, even if you are a big outliner, because you have to start somewhere. So I'm going to go into each of those sections just a little bit to detail them farther. So with setting, you can decide lots of different things about the setting. What's the scope? How big is this setting? Is it all taking place in some uh, canyon town where the Studley guy comes into town and the gal who owns the shop falls in love with him by the end of the story? Or is it some galaxy spanning thing with multiple planets and all kinds of space used up for other things? Uh, and what is your world like? I mean, even if you're having a very small scope, you've still got some kind of faction where you have people who disagree with each other. You've got people and culture and geography, all the things that I've listed there that go into your world. One thing that's interesting, I've got a whole presentation that talks about world building, but what conflicts already exist in the world that you've put together? What parts of this world building of your setting do you want to show off? What do you think is really cool about the ideas that you have had for this setting? Whether it's small town or intergalactic espionage, whatever it is, you're going to have some cool things in there that you want to showcase. And so having those in mind as you're deciding what to write about can make a big difference. So then we have characters. How many characters do you need? Well, it depends. How big is your story? Some short stories will have one character, some novels will have hundreds. So that one is one of those flexibility areas based on what kind of a story it is. If you're writing a romance, you've got your two main characters, plus you've got some other influence that's either getting between them or trying to force them together. You've got the place that they live that actually can fill the role of a character sometimes. And even the environment can change in response to the people. But you have all of these things going together. But also with your characters, well, what do they want and what do they need? That's where you get to do a lot of your fun thinking with a story because what a character wants usually gets in the way of what the character needs. And so if you brainstorm through this saying, okay, what are maybe some of the things that I can do with this in my story? If you're writing them down, you have the written outline. If you just start thinking about it before you start writing, it kind of primes the pump and gives you things to think about. And maybe some of those things will pop up as you are doing your free writing or whatever it is that you use for your process to get those words down. And then what parts of the setting are going to work with them or against them? Just another area where you can either build in that support or that conflict for your story. So lots of different things that you can do there. Um, so some author friends of mine will write snippets up front to clarify who their characters are, and it never goes into the books. They'll do written character interviews, for instance, or they'll use even random trait tables and build a character that way by rolling dice or choosing things at random some other way. Now, cool things happen when you start to build ties between the character and the setting that we already talked about. So it's no longer just a place where the story exists. It starts to mean something to the character, and you really want that emotion. And so as you're building this structure, you start to build those relationships in there. And so as you think about that, how can I make this person either really happy about the place they are at or really upset at the place they are at? And so, me, I like to write all these things down. Others, they know their characters well enough that they don't need to. So, ever finished a story and only realized the best attributes of your character as you were finishing the book? Um, that that's actually pretty common. You discover your character as you write, and then you look back at the beginning and say, oh, yeah, the character needed some more refinement. You can actually update that to give them that consistency uh, through an edit pass because you were discovering as you went who those characters are. Uh, and so that's one of the things that's really cool about editing. Once you are done, you can fix all of those things to make everybody's journey through the story seem consistent and to make sense. And it's because that's all following that structure that we were talking about. Okay, so the problem that they face, uh, whether you write it down or not, you're going to need a list of potential obstacles, things that your character will run into that cause them problems. The longer the story is, the more of those you'll need. A short story, you might only need one or two difficulties to overcome. A novel, you may need dozens. And so, do you need to write them all down? Well, again, it's maybe. Uh, do you need to use them all? No, of course not. Uh, so, what do you do if you have a better idea later? Well, you can go ahead and use it, but you have to do it within reason because you want to stay consistent with the way you are addressing the story. You may have a really cool idea that doesn't fit into the story that you're working on. And so make a note, set it aside. Yeah, I'll come back to that later, maybe the next story. Uh, but one of the things that I like to do is talk about rules of thumb, things that are general process that pretty much anybody can use in their stories. And so one of those is, well, what's the worst thing that could happen to my character at any given point in the story? And figure out how they can have that worst thing happen to them and then eventually dig their way out of that problem. The more dire the situation, the better. But you do need to keep it in the scope of the genre. If you're writing a nice, cozy romance story of some kind, you probably don't want to involve snipers. So, yeah, you have to make sure things balance well like that. Yeah, nuclear explosions in rom-coms, yeah, generally those don't mix. And so, if you can come up with ideas that really fit the genre that you are working with, if you have that list on hand, whether you have it in your head or written down, you have resources that you can draw on. You get to a particular point and think, oh, I need something to happen rather than having to come up with something from scratch right there. It's like, okay, what was I thinking about that I could do here? And you have some options where you can start writing again immediately instead of having to go off into research mode for a while. So, one thing I wanted to mention is about genre. Some genres have very specific structure and outline requirements. You know, some of these, yeah, romance, mystery, political, or the police procedural. You have rom-coms, you have urban fantasies. Each of those has elements that aren't likely to appear in the other elements. And so you can't have a typical romance without a meet cute and a happily ever after, right? Mystery, police procedure, all of these things have their own expected tropes and their own standards for what goes into that kind of a story. Now, can you break those norms? Well, yeah, sure, you can do that, but you may pay for it with a lost audience if you don't do it well. A lot of times you can take some of those tropes and turn them upside down, invert them, but as long as you're addressing the basic issue that that trope brings up, then you can actually make that work. And so the way you address the guy and the girl meeting in a romance story, well, how many different romance stories are there and how many different ways has that been done? I mean, it's a very simple concept, but implementation has been done thousands of times in thousands of ways. So taking a new angle on an old trope can be really interesting. And that's where you get a lot of fun experimentation and uh, breaking expectations and surprising your readers. You want to surprise them pleasantly, though. Uh, if you do it the wrong way, you might end up with like the nuclear explosions in a rom-com problem. So there is a book that I own called Anatomy of Genres. And so I wanted to talk about some of the things that I have learned from that very briefly. John Truby wrote this book and he put in some common beats for lots of different story structures. And he did this by genre. And so you can look through and say, okay, if I'm writing a science fiction story, there's the list of things that I need to make sure I'm addressing. If I'm writing a Western, I've got a different list. If it's a gangster story, I have a different list. Now, there are a lot of overlaps, just like on that graph I was showing you with the story structures. And so his book showed me a lot of the similarities and differences between all of those genres. And so, being the computer guy that I am, I built a spreadsheet like the story structure image I showed you, but it contains all of the beats that were listed in that book for all of the genres. So beats in one genre aren't always going to be there in all of the others. Like action movies will usually have a training montage or assembling a strike team. Gangster movies might have a fake ally moment. Those sorts of things will pop up that really aren't necessarily going to fit into another kind of a story. So, once again, I'm going to show you the completely unreadable high level of complexity in this problem. So you can see here I have running down the left-hand side is the story from beginning to end, and across the top are each of the genres. And then each of those little blobs of text that you see there is describing one of those beats. I put this together so that if I wanted to, for instance, write a science fiction cowboy story, I look at the science fiction column, I look at the cowboys column, and I say, okay, I want to hit all of those, but I'm going to emphasize and hit harder on my primary genre. And so that's one of those ways that I've used this idea with story structure. If you actually want to see this in a readable format, then go ahead and email me and I can send a copy of it to you. But while I was putting this together, I came across a couple of questions where I suspected the author had a couple of beats that might have been out of order, or and I don't know if he did it on purpose or if he had just never laid it out in the same way that I did like this. So yeah, I've thought about actually emailing John Truby and asking him about that. Now, this really isn't all set in concrete and say you must do this at each point of the story, but it's really a lot of good guidelines. It's more like the pirate code. Uh, you don't have to adhere to it completely, but things generally work better when you do. One of your tools that you have available to you is the emphasis that you put onto each aspect of your story like that. So the idea is that you need to make good use of the beats and the tropes and the conventions of your genre. If you have some experience reading stories of that type, you should already have a really good idea of what all of those are. You can also download things like beat sheets for a particular genre. There's all kinds of resources out there. So, yeah, one of my goals here is to give you interesting ways to look at that information and make use of it as you are writing. And so the idea is that you need to make use of those as you think over your story structure and your outline. Now, one of my favorite ways, like I'd mentioned, is I will pick two different genres, sometimes even three, and put the beats all together parallel. Now, some of them will overlap and I'll have the same kind of a thing. Like if you look about a third of the way down, you can see there's one that runs all the way across. Everything's got an entry there. Some of them are a little bit more sparse, where you'll have only one thing in here, one thing in here, a lot. So they do vary a lot uh, in how they are laid out by genre there. But let's move on. And so, what about structure? You're probably thinking, but John, you said you were going to talk about structure more. So, notice that all of this still works whether you're outlining or not. If you know the kind of story that you're writing and you have enough experience with it, you can come up with what happens next without an outline. I have one friend who was very religious about outlining her stories after discovering that she couldn't just free write her way through and get everything right. It took a lot of work to edit that into a usable story. So she started outlining and it worked really well. Then when she had like 20, 30, 40 novels written, I think she doesn't do hardly any outlining anymore. She just says, okay, here's the main highlights of the story that I want to hit as I'm going through. And then she just dives into it because she has the experience that makes that easy to do. And so wherever you are on your ability to hold that in your head determines a lot about how you can write it and how much editing it will take. So now that we've got some good ground rules on structure, we can move a little bit deeper into the core of the structure discussion. One thing I wanted to do here is go over, this is an example of the Dan Wells 7-point structure. I want to use an example with that. So Act 1, you've got your hook and a plot turn 1. Act 2 has a pinch 1, midpoint, pinch 2. Act 3 has a turn 2 and a resolution. All of these are defined out. You can read up on those, and there's a big paragraph that describes all of those things. But I've got just a really brief summary on what each of those is. Like on hook, you present a problem or a question, and then you build interest. And you go all the way through to where you are resolving the hook question down there at the very end. And so an interesting question is, if you have these 7 points, what order do you think would work when you're defining this story? If you want to put some text to each of those as a very brief miniature outline, what order do you think you ought to approach those in? Just do them chronologically or some other ordering? Um, I was thinking about that and came across someone who had an idea on how to do that. And so there are the numbers for their recommended order on how you approach it. For instance, you come up with your resolution last and you think, okay, when everything is back to normal, this is what happens. And then you go into the hook that matches that resolution. And so you can see you start with 1 at the bottom, then you go up to 2 here, you do your midpoint, and then you go in and finish up your Act 1 entry, and then your Act 3 entry, and then you bracket your middle in Act 2, filling out those items. And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting approach. Can any of you see why that might be an interesting way of looking at a story? Things that it might bring out to you as you're considering what to write about?
At least when you have the end of the story, you know where you're going.
Right. Yeah, you have a target to shoot toward. And if you have the beginning and the end, it's probably a little bit easier to say, okay, in the middle, I have to get something that's the transition from the less active to the more active participant, things like that. And so you can kind of narrow down the scope of, okay, what do I need to decide for that point in the story? And so, yeah, if you can decide how the chain of events progress with a cause and effect at every step,
Mhm.
like that, uh, then you don't end up having the Deus ex machina kind of effect where things just happen because they need to happen at that point in the story. You can go through and say, okay, I know what the hook is, and so the plot turn one has to be based on something from that starting point. And so it gives you an opportunity to just do really super high level. Uh, and so one of the things that I wanted to do is go over uh, I had, you know, I am not a romance author, so you might laugh at me because of this, but I put together an example. And so if I look at entry one, the resolution of the story, we are going to have the heroine and her boyfriend save her florist business. Have any of you read a story like that before? Uh, okay. So then we go to number two, which is the start of the story. So the boyfriend to be shows up planning to tear down a city block and build a new convention center. He comes in as the wrecking ball. Okay, then you go into step three, the midpoint of the story, the big turnover. Boyfriend discovers something historical about the site that's tied to his family. And then you move on to the next step, which is number four, which is in Act One. Okay, the boyfriend fights with the heroine. They have their argument at the city hall when he's filing paperwork. And so that way you've got them introduced to each other. And of course, they both hate each other initially. Uh, then you go to the end of the story where number five, he's got his moment of reckoning. So she finds about his family ties and confronts him with the missing piece of the puzzle. I don't know what that puzzle is. I'm just kind of getting the high level outline there. Number six, so we're looking at the middle of the story for the last two entries. He files his paperwork because she can't afford a lawyer to contest it. And then seven, well, he wants to help her, but he's committed too much and can't back out despite the family history link. And so you've got this whole structure set up there by just going through and doing it in this order, where you're taking the really very broad story and narrowing it down as you add elements. And so that's one of the ways that you can use one of these story structures. And so then you just need to work out whatever other details this little story needs to be able to meet the things that your readers are craving in a story. So that's kind of an example of how you could put something like that together. I have another example here where you have Harry Potter. So I've got each of the seven different points listed in here, and it does the same sort of a thing. Now let's see, we have about 10 more minutes, it looks like. Is that right?
15.
So, okay, 15 minutes. That looks like we're doing really well then. And so with Harry Potter, you've got he's a mistreated orphan. He turns 11, gets his Hogwarts invitation. There's the troll in the dungeon. You have the Sorcerer's Stone is hidden in the school. You have problems identifying who the enemy is. You go from the three-headed dog to the final discovery. And then there's the final denouement with meeting with Dumbledore, and he answers their questions. And so you have all of those things in there. And you can do the same thing with one of the other story structures. You can say, okay, this is a fantasy story or an urban fantasy story since it's actually modern day. And you can go through and say, okay, here are the different plot points that I should expect to find in here. And then you look through the story and you can almost always find something that applies to them. And so that's a way of analyzing existing stories to see how they have done it. So, how much detail do you really want to write down? And it's another one of those, well, it depends. I keep going back to that because writers are all different. And so your level of detail really does depend entirely on you. One of the ways that you can actually tell whether you're writing too much or too little is if you write too much, you keep running into things that you want to change. And if you don't write enough, you keep hitting roadblocks where you don't know what comes next. And so those are kind of your clues as to how to tell whether you're writing too much or too little. So you find where you're comfortable and where you waste the least amount of time. So that's kind of that rule of thumb again to how do you tell when you have too much or too little? Uh, because just having one page of notes, if you're a pantser, that may be all you need to say, okay, am I on track to finish the story that I started? So resource management. Uh, you need to make sure you're using that outline as a resource and not as handcuffs, like I was talking about. So, what resources do you really need before you get started? That really depends. It can vary a lot. So, what resources are going to save you time? If you know, okay, when I wrote my last story, I spent a lot of time researching whatever it is, or I ended up getting stuck on some aspect of the story. Maybe that's where you ought to spend a little bit more time planning and deciding what you need to do with the story when you get to that point, so you don't hit those same roadblocks again. Uh, and so all of that can determine how much of an outline you need and uh, what you can do to save yourself time. That's one of the biggest goals in this whole thing is what is going to make it work better for you, what's going to give you a story that's easier to edit and gets written faster. Uh, I want you to be efficient with the way you're writing as much as I want you to get all of the details right in your writing because yeah, if you take 10 years for each novel, well, yeah, that's not an exactly fast pace. You probably ought to be shooting a little bit higher for getting more stuff done. So, yeah, all of these different ideas, I'm hoping to give you some things that you can add to your toolbox to make it so that you are a more effective writer at getting those ideas and those emotions and that structure to where it works and it does exactly what your readers are expecting it to do for them so that they can enjoy the story that you're giving them. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention here with resources, uh, you can use that outline as your resource. So, what really is going to save you time? If it takes more time than it saves you, you probably ought to skip that part. And so, yeah, ideally, your lists, whether they are mental or written, will hold a few more things than you really need. You'll have more resources than you can put into one story. It's just, okay, I've got 5 ideas for what a murder weapon might be in this kind of a mystery story. Am I going to use all 5? No, I probably only need one. But if you have several things that you've been thinking about, it gives you some uh, room to play. So, any of you writing as a co-author, or have you written with somebody in the past on the same story? Because that one actually has radically different requirements on planning and resources. Because that one, it's a really hard one to get by with seat of the pants writing because you have to line up with each other.
Yeah.
But since we don't have any co-author people in the group, I'll kind of skip past that one a little bit. So if you're writing something as a team, yeah, you really do have to have a solid plan and an outline because pantsing and co-authoring just don't really mix very well. And so question and answer time here at the end. So, how can this tie into what works best for you? Have you got some ideas now of things that you can use that will make things easier for you?
I think yeah, it just reminds me, just reminds me of what I should be doing that I don't do. I mean, with my two books that are out, the first chapter I wrote, I mean, I kind of knew what was going to happen in the end, but the first chapter I wrote ended up being chapter seven, 6 or 7, because that's how it ended up going. I mean, I know some of us write from the middle out. Well, I didn't do that intentionally. It's just as I got through the book, I'm thinking, I need something at the beginning that connects everything. And the second one, I did the same thing. I wrote the what I thought was going to be the first chapter that ended up being chapter 7. And but it reminds me of things I need to double check. I have a very good beta reader that reminds me of that all the time. Deborah, this isn't the place to put that. But you bring up some information that I should be following that I'm not.
Melissa, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it makes me less wary of outlining. I usually don't outline because it stifles my creativity, and but I think that like the 7.1 would work really well for like a loose outline.
Yeah, so yeah, I hope to have provided some ideas on how you can uh, make outlining work, even if you don't actually have a written outline. Just
Mhm.
knowing what goes into one can help you with that flow of the story. And so I, I I like to cover things in a way that gives everybody some resources that they can draw on.
Oh, for sure.
Agreed.
Oh, and on this screen, if you look right here, I believe this link here works. This, if I remember right, it was a while since I put this link in here, but this, I think, goes to the original uh, story structure comparison that I took uh, my ideas from and wrote into the one that I showed on screen. One of the two screens that was so tiny that you couldn't read it. If you go back through the recordings, you can actually type that in as well if you don't get it written down right now. But that story structure comparison is there. And then if you wanted the anatomy of genres version, not all of the descriptions make a lot of sense if you don't have the book to where you can go in and read the full description of each of them, but at least it gives you a good idea of the kinds of things that might go into a particular genre. So I have a little bit more on resources here where, yeah, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, if you haven't already, there's a free short story and then you can sign up there. There's my Gmail email address, or you can find me on Twitter. I've got a blog that I occasionally post to as well. So all of those are on the list there. And so either you can copy them down now or go back, look through the recordings. Uh, I actually had pictures here of a bunch of the anthologies that I'm in and my two trilogies I've written. Now, I have just barely re-released this bottom trilogy here with new covers. And
Oh,
so that was a lot of fun, a really interesting process, getting the rights back from the publisher and republishing them myself. So yeah, I'm in that category where I'm kind of a hybrid author, where I've worked with three different small presses and I have self-published some of my other stuff. And so I've kind of been able to experiment with both sides of that. But yeah, that is a completely different issue from what we've been talking about with getting the story structure down, because that's the same either way. Whether you're self-publishing, whether you're shooting for a big five publisher, if you want to go with a small press somewhere in the middle, uh, you have to write a good story,
mhm.
whatever way you're doing it. So, any other questions that you wanted to go over? We're getting kind of close to done here, but we have a little bit of time left. If you have any questions, then we can see if we can work through to an answer. Now, my favorite answer is I don't know, but I'll always have an answer, even if it's that one.
When you self-publish, what do you find different when you go with a designated press or self-publishing? What are the pros and cons to those?
Well, one of the things that I discovered is that self-publishing, uh, I like to have control over the advertising. I can put things on sale whenever I want to. I can advertise them however I want to, and I get to pick the exact cover that I want. I can do the layout the way I want, all those things. I like to do that. Other people think of that and think, there's no way in the world I want to do that. And so it depends on personality type as to whether one will fit you better than the other. One of the things that comes along with using a small press or a larger publisher is their audience and their advertising. Like one of the books that I wrote is part of a shared universe. And there were I think, over 90 other novels already in that shared universe. And so I had a built-in readership. And so that worked out really well. That opportunity came along after I thought, well, maybe I've just moved permanently to publishing my own stuff full time. That opportunity showed up and I thought, oh wow, this is actually going to be really useful. And so I jumped on it and it worked out really well for me. And so there are these benefits both ways, depending on what you're after.
Okay.
Anything else on story structure? We've got about a minute left to go over your deepest, darkest questions. Yeah, I hope that what I've been able to go over here has been really useful to you to whether it's reminders of things that you can work on or new information. Uh, I don't want people to be scared of outlining because it's the same process whether you have it in your head or on paper. It's just the level of detail that you're saving to look at.
I get it. I mean, I've only outlined, but it's a very, very loose outline. It's kind of like it starts here, and I think I'm going there. And in the middle, they're going to be, they're going to be doing XYZ, whatever I've decided. And I have just, there are times I'll do something like that. Okay, I'm going to start here. We're going to go there. And in the middle, they have to do one, two, or three things. And then a lot of times that changes. Only one of my books that I know exactly how it was going to end. And I didn't know that until after I'd written a lot and then moved things around. But by the third chapter, I knew what the last line of the book was going to be. So I knew where I was going. And I kind of knew that's where I was going, but that last line I thought was very good. And but the other one I knew where I was going. I kind of knew what the date was going to be, and then it just kind of fell into place as I was typing. So this will
Well,
help.
good. Well, I'm glad. It looks like we've got about 9 minutes before there's some closing remarks and stuff. Or is there? I think there's a keynote, isn't there?
There's another session that we're all going to go to, and then the keynote.
Oh, okay. Well, then I will let people jump back out to where we're supposed to gather out there.
Thanks,
Let me
John.
check and see if there's an easy way